Hi everyone, welcome to World Have Your Say. I'm Lucy Hockings. In today's programme, Formula One bosses say next week's Grand Prix in Bahrain will go ahead. Do you agree? It's been a big conversation online. Many of you have been tweeting us asking if the drivers and the teams will be safe. Is the race a tool of repression or a way for Bahrainis to get back on their feet? Do Formula One bosses have a moral obligation to get involved in politics? The hashtag, as always, is WHYS. Let's get the conversation going. Welcome to World Have Your Say. With me to start today's programme is Andy Young, an F1 fan and blogger at andyf1.tumblr.com. He's live from Southampton here in the UK, and also Rashid joins us from Bahrain, and Dr. Alala Shahabi, a founding member of Bahrain Watch, an organisation trying to hold the government accountable for its actions. She is also in Bahrain. Remember, if you want to join in, do dial us on Skype, BBC_WHYS. Andy, if I can start with you, do you think the race should go ahead?
I think it will go ahead now the FIA have certified that it's going to go ahead with their press release. But I have severe concerns regarding the security and safety of those who are travelling to the event, both part of the Formula One circus and fans. I mean, I was reading today online of tear gas and violence still going on within the capital of Bahrain, and it's not something I think Formula One should be going into. But now the FIA have given the go-ahead for the race. I think there's no other alternative but for the teams and drivers to trust the FIA and to go to Bahrain for the Grand Prix next weekend.
Rashid, is it safe in Bahrain?
I don't...
Extremely. I mean, of course, there's many reports here, but you know, people are alive. People are many. Just yesterday, we had an American comedian down here in Bahrain, Maz Jabrani. We have many events. Actually, in fact, this year, 2011 to 2012 has been the most active year for motorsport in Bahrain. We've had over 25 top flight racing events, which include drag racing, circuit racing, held at the BIC, and we have had no incidents.
So living in Bahrain, Rashid, you can assure the drivers and the teams that they're going to be safe?
Yeah.
Andy, how do you think this has been handled so far by Formula One bosses?
I think it's been quite an embarrassing situation so far. The teams and the drivers and Bernie didn't really want to take responsibility for what was going on. And I'm glad now that the FIA are finally giving us a definite answer as to whether the race is going to go ahead. So, as I said, trust is what's needed now, and the teams and drivers, they haven't spoken out against Bahrain. So I think they've just got to trust the FIA, go to the race, and hope that it all goes well.
Dr. Shahabi, you're in Bahrain. What's your view on this?
My view is primarily is around the safety, not just of the racers and the racing teams. It's around the safety of civilians. I've just come back from a funeral of a 22-year-old protester who was shot dead on March the 31st. Tens of thousands attended the funeral, and I witnessed my car being shot at directly as police were targeting an unarmed man. I've got the video on my Twitter account if anyone wants to check it out. I've lived in London most of my life, and I've never felt as unsafe, despite what the police advisor in Bahrain, John Yates, has been saying. So my primary concern is around around the safety of civilians. They'll be held with a gun to their head and forced to remain in the villages, and will be suppressed in order not to be allowed to protest peacefully during the F1.
So you're fearful that it's actually going to get worse, the crackdown, as we get closer to race day?
Of course, just last night alone, we've had tens of injuries reported of civilians being shot at with shotgun pellets. So there's been an escalation in the crackdown of the last couple of days already. So we're very fearful that we're going to be dealt with a very iron fist in the countdown to the race.
Andy, do you think that they have a moral obligation, the Formula One bosses, perhaps, to have pulled out?
I think they did have an opportunity to pull out. I think Bernie Ecclestone made it quite clear that he was willing to allow the teams to make their own decision. And the teams, from what I've read and heard, didn't make that decision. They stayed quite quiet. There was the unnamed team principal who spoke out about how the teams and drivers weren't happy going to Bahrain, but we didn't hear much more from the teams and the drivers themselves. So I think the teams and drivers now have got to go because they haven't spoken out. Bernie Ecclestone, I saw on the internet today, he went into the drivers' meeting in China today and asked the drivers, if they're happy going to Bahrain next weekend, and no one spoke out about it. So the drivers have kept their mouths closed. So I do believe that they've got to go to Bahrain now because they had the opportunity to pull out a week before the race takes place. Any other altercations between the teams and the drivers and Bernie Ecclestone and the FIA could be very detrimental to the sport. They've had their decision and they've got to go to Bahrain now. It's a shame because safety is the top priority, and I don't think the safety is going to be guaranteed in Bahrain, but the teams have now just got to go.
Well, let's have a listen now to the spokesman for the government, Sheikh Abdul Aziz bin Mubarak Al Khalifa. Let's hear what he had to say.
There are measures that are in place that were never there last year, and therefore we encourage everybody to play his part in building a better future for Bahrain. Last year, once again, we had people demonstrating in the middle of the capital. Now, as you know, we are back to near normalcy, and what we see are pockets of violence in remote parts of the country. And therefore, I reassure everybody that's coming in, Bahrain is safe to race once again.
That's a view there from the Bahraini government. Let's bring in Matt Hardegree from the automotive news website jalopnik.com. He is live from Virginia in the US. Thanks for joining in with us, Matt. Do you agree that the race should go ahead?
I don't think so, but there's really no point to stop it right now. Basically, we're dealing with an oppressive, totalitarian regime, and I'm not talking about Bahrain, I'm talking about Formula One and Bernie Ecclestone. And this idea that the teams could all of a sudden say, hey, no, we don't want to go and not go is just bunk. Because of the Concord Agreement, because of the agreements in place, all of the teams basically have to decide to go or they can't go. It's ridiculous to say that it's, oh, everyone's okay, everyone wants to go. They don't. I really don't think they do. How do you feel when you hear that, Rashid?
I think that people who haven't visited Bahrain and who are just, sitting in the United States and they're bombarded by media coverage that, I personally feel is not fair, have a skewed image of what's going on here. I mean, events have been going on in Bahrain non-stop. We've just had the string of culture which has been ongoing. We've had amazing talents like Andrea Bocelli and many, many others at Arad Fort and Harrak. And security has been very light, and we've had no incidents.
Matt? I think that's a whitewash, honestly. The Bahraini government has spent millions of pounds trying to convince people that Bahrain is like London. That's simply not the case. And my fear is when you have these events, what you do is you don't encourage people to act better. You encourage people to act out. And there are groups within Bahrain who I think will use this as an opportunity to...
We seem to have lost Matt in Virginia there. What you're seeing on screen at the moment is demonstrations taking place last night in Bahrain. So as we can see, Rashid, there is political activity on the streets in the country.
Yes, there is. But what's important is that those who have, who have a political message to get out, Formula One is a great platform for, very civil way of bringing over your grievances and talking to the rest of the world. Using violence and using all these things has never worked, and it's always been rejected by everybody in Bahrain. Every part of society rejects any form of violence.
Let's have a look at some of the comments that have been coming into us here. Lots of comments, really, about security. People are very worried about the safety of the teams. John in the US has posted on our Facebook page, there's far too much volatility in Bahrain for any global sporting event. This race will serve as a magnet for extremists. If anything happens, and extremist groups have already said things will, the blood will be on the hand of Todd and Ecclestone, the other Formula One bosses. As long as they can count on their money, what they do, that's all they care about, I suppose. Let's bring in again Dr. Shahabi. Give us more of your opinion, Dr. Shahabi, on what you predict will happen. That person was just suggesting that there might be some serious extremist activity. Do you think we would see that?
Well, there's been already threats being made on social media by radical opposition groups announcing 3 days of rage during the F1. Naturally, Bahrain has been largely ignored in the mainstream media for the past year. So with the limelight on Bahrain, it's only natural that protesters will be using the opportunity to give their message to the rest of the world around their pro-democracy movement, around the suffering that they've had to endure. The death toll at the moment is 85, and we have around 600 political detainees. My husband himself was in prison for 10 months. I obviously had to take to the street to try and campaign for reforms in the country, yet we have seen no progress at all. And our message to the Formula One was always, do not tarnish the reputation of this noble sport. It's a car race at the end of the day in a country that's repressing the majority of its people. So save the reputation of your sport. It should be done in an atmosphere of celebration in which the entire country can enjoy this race. And unfortunately, you're going to be driving over in an environment of misery and frustration amongst many.
Matt, I know you're back from Virginia. Do you think it's damaged the reputation of Formula One?
I think it has. I think people look at Formula One the way they look at a lot of Western governments and how they deal with Bahrain, which is that at the end of the day, they don't care about what's going on in the country. Their biggest concern is getting what they want. And for Formula One, it's a race, and for the Western governments, it's an ally in a very rough part of the world.
Okay, thanks very much, Matt, and everyone for being with us. Do stay with us here on World Have Your Say. Let's keep the conversation going. Lots of tweets coming into us, lots of interest in this topic, so stay with us. Nuala McGovern from the World Have Your Say team is taking your calls. Nuala, what are people saying?
Well, I should say lots of calls coming in from lots of countries. Bahrain, no surprise there, but also South Africa, Saudi Arabia and Iraq. And one that just came in from Singapore. His name is Manjur. He was speaking to one of our producers here, David. He says, my feeling is that human rights are in worse shape in Bahrain than in Syria. Zain, in response to our daily email, got in touch, and he has a different take. He says, give the country a break and stop this twisted way of stating how Bahrain is today. It's a great country, people are nice, and they deserve the F1 and any other event that draws tourists. Did you know that they have pop artists that regularly go there without any trouble? Mujta PK tweets, it's the crass commercialism getting priority over human rights that bothers me. So you can keep posting. Go to facebook.com/worldhaveyoursay.
And of course, the hashtag WHYS. Let's continue our conversation. Formula One bosses have decided that the Bahrain Grand Prix will go ahead. Lots of you are talking about this online. There are concerns about safety, but I wanted to bring in Haman, who has tweeted us from Oman, saying this isn't actually an issue of safety. This is an issue of morality. People are being indiscriminately tear-gassed and horribly suppressed. But Manal in Bahrain has also said the F1 Grand Prix is always a social and sport event. Why, when it comes to Bahrain, is it being dragged into politics? There's some very different views there. With me still is Andy Young, who blogs here in the UK. Rashid joins us from Bahrain, of course, and Dr. Shahabi is also with us from Bahrain. Rashid, if we can go back to you. If something happens over the weekend, the event is cancelled, what would that mean to people in Bahrain?
Well, see, this year it's very important that the Formula One goes forward because a lot of the services and facilities have been designed to benefit the average Bahraini. This year, 90% of the food products that are being served at the Formula One come from average Bahraini farmers and suppliers because they're cheaper, they're better, and they benefit the people. So there are many layers of society, from the simple taxi driver to the hoteler to the entertainment industry, that really depend on that extra boost that Formula One has been giving us since 2004. Because if you remember, we were the first country in the Middle East to embrace motorsport in such a large way. And we're the first country in the Middle East that has had top-level support from the government to the average man on the street. And we've had a history of motorsport in Bahrain that spans back more than 30 years.
So, Rashid, did you really notice it last year when it was cancelled?
It was very, very unfortunate. It was a sad time, but the government authorities decided to cancel the F1 because it seemed much more important that the whole country focus on reform, focus on sorting out the grievances that people had, and calling people together to look for solutions, because it was a lot of soul searching with the people and the government. And
Dr. Shahabi, could I bring in you now and respond to Rashid? Do you think that reforms and progress have been made over the past year?
Well, I let the death toll speak for itself. It's now 85. We've had an average of a death or two happening on a weekly basis. And you don't need to listen to me. I can refer you to the Médecins Sans Frontières, to Human Rights Watch reports, to Amnesty International, who just released their report today to tell you that there has been no progress on reform, and that the continuing violations, arbitrary arrest, indiscriminate use of tear gas, and even more lately, the use of shotgun pellets. So in terms of seeing the evidence of change on the ground, the government had a year to get its act together, yet nothing has changed on the ground. And they're using the Formula One as a whitewash to say that everything's fine in the country, when in fact it isn't. Well, and they just hired tens of PR companies and spent millions to try and portray this image and to market the Formula One as a sign of some kind of progress. The best thing that can happen to the Bahraini economy now is for a solution to the political conflict, so that there's genuine stability. You can't just, pretend that everything's fine and expect the whole world to believe it. Which is why the Formula One was cancelled last year. It was largely a message to the government that, you don't deserve to host a prestigious event like this, and you don't deserve, as a royal family, to be endorsed and to enjoy the magnanimity of hosting such an event.
Rashid, as Dr. Shahabi was talking, you're laughing. What's your response to what she said?
The thing is, the Formula One last year was cancelled by the free choice of the government, not because somebody came along and said, you don't deserve this. And now, and she's saying that the government hasn't implemented reform. The government has opened its arms many, many times with many, many initiatives, the National Dialogue, the BICI report, and every single time opposition ignores these calls. Even the Crown Prince offered a dialogue with no preconditions, and it was flatly refused. And every time we hear this, we hear, no, the government doesn't do that, or the government doesn't do this. I think it's about time that the opposition step forward and start talking to the government and start looking for solutions, instead of every single day saying, oh, there's problems, oh, there's problems, oh, there's problems. I mean, yes, there are problems. Are you going to bring solutions, or are you just going to complain? Telling the government to step down and saying you don't deserve Formula One or you don't deserve motorsport. Motorsport is a public good. Motorsport brings people together. Violence separates people.
What you're saying, can you please tell that to the mother of the dead boy that was killed last week? Tell her to stop protesting on the streets. Tell the hundreds of families of detained prisoners that have been denied a fair trial. Tell that to the hundreds of people that haven't been reinstated to their jobs as punishment for taking part in protests. Don't start shouting on the screen, telling us and pushing this narrative and absolving the government's responsibility. We're asking for a democratic transition, and we're asking for a fully elected government and an elected prime minister. These are the basic standards of human rights that are respected elsewhere in the world. We are no exception. We deserve the same rights as everyone else, and do not pretend otherwise. And likewise, I go back again that people like Rashid...
Dr. Shahabi, let Rashid have his say. Rashid, go ahead.
Motorsports is a completely separate issue. Yes, we have political problems, and they are internal, and we will solve them together as Bahrainis. But we should not let that get in the way of people's livelihoods, people living their lives. It's very tragic what has happened to many people in Bahrain, and together we will find a solution. But punishing the government or punishing the regime, as you would like to call it, is not the way forward. Because in the end of the day, you're holding back livelihoods
when the Formula One goes ahead.
If I could interrupt both of you just for a moment, because we have another viewer in called Dilraz, who is also living in Bahrain. Dilraz, listening to this conversation going on at the moment, what do you make of it?
I personally think that the F1 should go ahead because it's about time Bahrain had its chance. And while I do agree that everything is not as rosy as we hope it is, we need to start from somewhere, and I think this is how we can start a change. You can't every day go out and say F1 should not happen, Bahrain should not have anything good. Where is Bahrain going to go then? That's the question I want to ask Dr. Ala. We need to change and give us a chance to change. Don't you think so?
You don't need to. Of course, I think we've been asking for the change for the past year. We've been asking for an end to the use of excessive use of force. We've been asking for an end to systematic torture. We've seen none of that happen, and so I completely agree with you. Just one point: the F1, as it happens, will be imagine this from another point of view, it will be a complete provocation to the people of the country who are still continuing to suffer and live in misery, while the Formula One teams and racers are going to be popping champagne bottles, going to be partying at live concerts, and are going to be pretending that and celebrating, while at the same time the rest of the country being locked down in their villages with security checkpoints at every entrance, with guns pointing at them every time they try and emerge to get their message across to the world, which is the reason why Bernie Ecclestone personally contacted me.
Don't you think that this is an opportunity for you? If the international media is allowed into Bahrain during the F1, don't you think they will see what's happening, and it could actually be an opportunity for you?
We've been welcoming journalists for the past year, except that the government has denied entry to tens of journalists in the country. A television crew was turned away just 2 days ago, and they've been very restrictive and denying access to the country for journalists. So, of course, we've been asking, we welcome the entry of journalists, and we welcome the coverage that potential journalists who will come and see for themselves the repression that's happening, because I don't think that they'll be able to scale back the security during the F1. In fact, they're going to be increasing it.
What bet do you get out of cancelling the F1? So many people lose their jobs. Bahrain will go down the drain. And then what will you fight for? Maybe you should let the F1 happen, get Bahrain back, and then ask for your rights. Because obviously, like you said, every individual deserves their rights. And aren't you taking away the rights of the other Bahrainis who want the F1 to go ahead?
Oh, you have every right to enjoy yourself. We just don't have the right to practice and exercise our freedom of assembly and our freedom of expression. That's the only difference.
OK, Dr. Shahabi, Dilraz Rashid, I'm sorry to interrupt the conversation. I just wanted to finally bring in Andy for a final comment. Andy, listening to this heated debate from people in Bahrain, what are your thoughts?
Well, I was also going to bring up the fact that GP2, the feeder series to Formula One, are staying on in Bahrain for a week after the Bahrain Grand Prix. They'll be supporting the Bahrain Grand Prix next weekend, and the weekend after that they'll be staying on for their own standalone race. And the thing is, safety with Formula One is also a key question in this debate, but also the safety of the GP2 paddock the week after the Bahrain Grand Prix is also quite high on my agenda, because they're obviously quite younger than the Formula One drivers that are currently racing, so it's all going to be a steep learning curve for them to be racing there. OK, Andy, thanks very much for joining us. Thanks to everyone. Carry on the conversation. Why don't you go to facebook.com/World Have Your Say. Welcome to World Have Your Say. We're talking Formula One, of course. The Bahrain Grand Prix is to go ahead next week, according to Formula One bosses. Well, with me is Matt Hardegree from the automotive news website jalopnik.com. He's live from Virginia in the US. Matt, give us your thoughts on the fact that the Grand Prix is going to go ahead, but we're hearing so much dissent and concerns about safety.
I think that this notion that this is an apolitical decision is sort of nonsense at this point, because what they've done is, even if there isn't an issue with safety directly at the track, they've created sort of a flashpoint, because we're just hearing now on Twitter that the Bahraini government, the security forces, are using birdshot against protesters, because what this does is it's such a high-stakes event for them, and it's such a high-stakes event for the protesters, that it causes these sorts of clashes. So even if the event is safe, I don't think the country and the people in the country are necessarily safe to demonstrate.
Can we bring us Carlos Latuf, who's a political cartoonist in Rio de Janeiro in Brazil? You've been drawing cartoons about the Arab Spring and also about Bahrain. Do you think the Grand Prix should have gone ahead, Carlos?
Yes. Well, I've been producing cartoons about the Bahrain during the Arab Spring last year. And I make artworks to be reproduced by protesters in posters and Twitter, Facebook. I make the same for Egypt and for the past 13 years for Palestine. This is not professional. I'm not being paid by anyone, you know. I make this because I believe in solidarity with people. I think all this noise about the Grand Prix of Formula One is a good opportunity to discuss about the crackdown on pro-democracy movement in Bahrain. Different of other countries of the Arab Spring, there is a real information blackout about what is happening in Bahrain, especially in the Gulf mainstream media.
Dr. Al-Shahabi, would you agree, though, that the Formula One arriving in Bahrain has once again highlighted the issue of human rights in the country?
Well, it's a shame that it takes a car race to highlight the human rights, where we've been screaming out for our cause over the past year and given very limited coverage by mainstream media. So it's great that now there is coverage that's been directed towards Bahrain. Again, I mean, our only fault, our movement and the revolution that's taking place is no different to that happened in Egypt, in Syria, in Libya, and in Tunisia. We've only been sidelined because the Bahraini government is a major Western ally. So that's the reason why there could, you'd never consider a sporting event in somewhere like Syria under the current political conflict that's happening there. But yet you are considering one in Bahrain. And like my previous speaker said, we're more concerned about the crackdown that's going to happen over the next week to suppress protests that would be targeting the Formula One.
We're having comments coming into us, tweets from Spain, Rwanda, Bangladesh as well. Many people tweeting and telling us whether or not they think that politics and sport should mix. Bernie Ecclestone, of course, saying that they don't get involved in the politics of a country. But let's hear now from Spanish Formula One driver Fernando Alonso, who said the decision is out of his hands.
The sport is made to help some kind of these situations, and if doing the race and the sport can help the people there and can be a good thing, will be very good to go. If it's the opposite, if the sport can be a problem and it's not good to go, we will accept any decision because, as I said, it's not in our hands, and we will try to accommodate.
Matt, can I ask you, is it a difficult thing to ask a young Formula One driver who spends almost 24 hours a day thinking of how he can go faster around a track to comment on the political situation in a country and to take a stand?
Absolutely. I think it is tough. And I'm also biased here because he is on my Formula One fantasy team, so I have to be careful what I say. But I agree, it's not for them to make those decisions. It's really for the team principals. I don't think that it's a question of morality for the drivers as much as a question of morality for Formula One, because like Bahrain, F1 is sort of a totalitarian regime. It's really up to Bernie Ecclestone. If he doesn't want to go, they wouldn't go. Simple as that.
Is there also a question, can I ask you, Dr. Shahabi, about whether a privately owned and funded company should be held hostage in some senses to public opinion and to politics?
I don't need to answer that. I met Bernie Ecclestone in March, and he called me 3 days ago, and we discussed this. And he was quite proud of the position that Formula One took in South Africa when they decided not to race there in protest against the apartheid regime. So I said to him, Bahrain is no different. I urged him to take the same position in Bahrain. So it does get dragged into conflicts. You can't isolate a sporting event from the situation on the ground in these cases. Again, Ecclestone is very concerned with, expressed his concern to me at least, without saying it publicly. But there's a hunger striker that's on his 65th day of hunger strike. He could die at any moment. And if that does happen, again, we're going to have an escalation in protests out of anger out of anger at the death of a very prominent human rights activist in the country, and that will spill into the Formula One race. You just can't ignore that. The race isn't in a bubble here. It's become intertwined within the conflict, and it's endorsing the royal family. He's very concerned with that. He even proposed that the opposition should hold a press conference in which he will attend and bring all the journalists so that we can get our message across, because the government is using fake rhetoric, slogans like unified, when in fact it continues its killing spree. So, you know, he realizes he's taking sides here, and he's expressed that to me personally. But unfortunately, he's contractually obliged, and he will not make the call to cancel the race himself unless he comes under that public pressure. So we're using programs like yours today, social media, and we hope that motorsport fans will put the pressure on him for him to take a stronger position. So, you know, I'm not very surprised with the position that he took to go ahead with the Formula One, because it's finances first for him.
So, Matt, Bernie Ecclestone definitely taking sides?
Yes, it's not apolitical. Choosing to go is just a political decision as choosing not to go.
Can I go back to you then, Dr. Shahabi? Do you think there is also a concern that this will be interpreted by the government as a symbol that things are returning to usual, it's business as normal in Bahrain?
The Bahraini government has spent millions. We've documented money being given to at least 15 PR companies so that they're fighting tooth and nail to get the Formula One to the country. That this is the pet project of the Crown Prince, for him to glow in the glory of having such an event. And this happens across the GCC. They're very competitive about holding prestige events and big sporting events like this, because it's a sign of, it's like a medal and a badge that they hold up against the rest of the world to show, you know, progress. When in fact it's just a very cosmetic, you know, it's something that doesn't touch the lives of people on the ground. Instead of, you know, spending all of that money on PR and holding a sporting event, why don't you spend it on in ways that will affect people's lives, like housing, like education? You just need to read the latest report issued 2 days ago by Médecins Sans Frontières to tell you how bad the health system is here.
Okay, Dr. Shahabi, we can see Carlos nodding. Would you like to jump in, Carlos?
Okay, I agree 100%. In my opinion, the Formula One in Bahrain since last year has nothing to do with sport. It's about politics. It's about an attempt of the dictator Hamad bin Isa al-Khalifa to show things in Bahrain as calm and under control, when actually people are being censored, arrested, beaten, tortured, and killed. Just check the annual report of Amnesty International on Bahrain for a long list of human rights violations committed by the King Hamad. Even medics without borders are prevented to enter Bahrain since March. It's also important to remind that Abdulhadi al-Khawaja, a woman rights activist, is now imprisoned for organizing peaceful protests. And he's carrying on a hunger strike, which is reaching the 60th day. So if Bernie Ecclestone had a single inch of decency, would cancel the Formula One in Bahrain for the sake of human rights and as a display of respect for the victims of King Hamad's dictatorship.
Okay.
Confirming the race.
Okay, Carlos, I'd like to bring in Khaled, who joins us now from Bahrain. Listening to that from Carlos, what's your reaction, Khaled?
The statement here that we have a dictatorship is totally exaggerated. We have elected parliament, we have a process of law, we have human rights, and whoever wants to demonstrate has the right to apply to the police through a guided route and can actually demonstrate in freedom. Demonstration is not throwing Molotov. Demonstration is not killing policemen. Demonstration is not destroying public property and private property. This is not democracy. These people receive their instructions from Iran. They want to turn Bahrain into a theocracy reporting to the Khamenei.
Okay, Khaled, I'd like Dr. Shahabi to respond, because your facial expressions are a real picture, Dr. Shahabi.
Sorry, I mean, we had a commission of inquiry that was appointed by the king that incriminated the government of systematic torture, excessive use of force, and the killing of 36 protesters, handed to the king himself, that yet we still get people like Khalid denying that any of that happened, and that we're all living in the perfect world here in Bahrain, and that we're a modern constitutional monarchy. I mean, how long will they continue propagating lies? Because the world just simply doesn't believe that. And these are the commissioners appointed by the king himself have incriminated the state in this, and they have not implemented the recommendations of that human rights report, unfortunately, and we're asking the government to maintain its promises and to meet.
Dr. Shahabi, thank you very much for your thoughts. Khalid, thank you very much for calling us from Bahrain. Tensions, of course, getting very heated. This is such a controversial issue. Do stay with us for plenty more here on World Have Your Say. Welcome back to World Have Your Say. I'm Lucy Hockings. Our topic today is Formula One. The bosses have announced that the Grand Prix will go ahead next week in Bahrain. It's been incredibly controversial. People tweeting us, not only concerned about safety, but asking the question whether Formula One should indeed be political or not. Let's take you straight to Nuala, who is in the World Have Your Say newsroom. She's got some callers who have been ringing in. Nuala.
Indeed, Lucy. In fact, there's been a steady stream from Bahrain. But just one of the points that you made there, we got a caller from Anonymous in China who said sports and politics shouldn't mix. But I think it's a little bit too late for that. But Bu Rashid in Bahrain got in touch to say Bahrain has bigger issues, things like housing. But he does think that this could be a good issue for the protesters, that is going to make it more transparent, picking up on one of the comments that Dilraz made earlier in the programme. And we also had people getting into the conversation from Turkey and all the way to Luxembourg. And James had this to say: how can people support the Grand Prix when the regime is brutalising people who are fighting for democracy and rights? And that was echoed by Aldair in Bahrain with a tweet. He said, Formula One didn't take the right decision. They only care about money. People are being killed and you only care about racing. Well, if you'd like to call us, you can with the number, or indeed maybe Skype us. That's BBC_WHYS.
Nuala, thanks very much. Let's talk to Peter now, who is a freelance motorsport writer who blogs at baronvonclutch.blogspot.co.uk, joining us from Vancouver in Canada. This is proving so controversial. Peter, what's your view?
Well, I think that it is impossible for Formula One to sort of divorce itself from all the politics. I mean, as much as the sport likes to be a hermetically sealed bubble, going from one country to the next and putting on a sporting event like that, the reality is it does not work like that. You know, when you are going into a country like that, you inadvertently involve yourself. And this is especially the case when the Formula One Grand Prix is endorsed by the Bahrain government itself.
Matt, if we could get a response from you, because some people who are tweeting us are saying it was fine to cancel it last year, but not this year.
I completely agree with Peter. I don't think that much has changed. This isn't suddenly a democratically, elected government, a democracy. And Bahrain has basically just spent millions of dollars to convince people that everything is okay. I personally was contacted by a former political editor from the Sunday Times who basically emailed me to say, hey, by the way, we're old journalist buddies. Everything's fine in Bahrain. It's just like London. In fact, I feel safer there.
Some people also tweeting asking if you're going to cancel the Grand Prix in Bahrain. There have been riots in London. How about cancelling the Olympics? Does that seem like a fair point to you, that this could spill over to other sports? Matt?
It's sort of ridiculous. And they also compare it to China. I mean, it's like saying, Burger King and Queen Elizabeth are both monarchs. I mean, I guess technically that's true, but I wouldn't ask one of them to make me a hamburger.
Peter, what do you think?
I completely agree with Matt. I think that if we start drawing the line of cancelling events like this, then where does it go? Are we cancelling the Olympics, the World Cup? And there have been cases, for example, in the past where team personnel were mugged in Brazil. Should we cancel that race as well? And the teams are in China right now, which has a very checkered past with human rights. Should we cancel that race as well? We have to draw the line somewhere. And
okay, Eric is joining us via Skype from South Africa. Listening to Peter and Matt there, what are your thoughts, Eric?
Well, I have to disagree with both gentlemen. I think that one has to look at what's happening in the larger part of the Arab world. And we can see quite clearly that the world has to step in and stand up against this kind of tyranny. And we can't carry on supporting this kind of regimes. And I mean, as a South African, we understand all about regimes and the politics of them. And I just think that people have to stand up and say, no, we're not going to support these tyrants. And that's the end of it. And Bernie Ecclestone, a man of his experience in years, should know better. And we do love our motor racing here in South Africa. And I speak for all of us when I say it's very sad not to have one. But at the end of the day, the line has got to be drawn, and enough is enough.
OK, Eric, thanks so much for Skyping us from South Africa. And thanks to all of you. Do continue the conversation online at facebook.com/Have Your Say. Thanks for joining us.